Welcome to Periscope. I'm Sam Coleman, your host. My guest on Periscope tonight is Raymond Nielsen. He's the International Public Relations Representative and a member of the Aetherius Society. We shall be discussing the life of Sir George King, the Western Master of Yoga. Raymond, welcome to Periscope.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. It's a great pleasure to be here again.
When and how was the Aetherius Society founded?
It was founded in 1955 in London, England, by, as you say, a Western Master of Yoga called George King.
Now, you were a student of Sir George King,
That's
and at one
correct.
time you were involved in running the London office.
Right.
What was Sir George like?
He was like, I suppose, a spiritual iceberg. There was the immediate man that you met, and then gradually over the years you realized that there was enormous depth to him. He had an incredible knowledge of spirituality. He had an incredible knowledge of what life was all about. He had an understanding through his yoga practices of the potential of man. And this is one of the driving forces that made him a great teacher, was because he believed and taught us to believe the spiritual nature of things.
Now, understandably, Sir George King was well respected.
Absolutely.
By people in England, also people here in the U.S. as well.
Yes.
What did you like most about him?
His enthusiasm for God and for godly things, his 100%, 1000% belief that God exists in all things, the belief that our future is beyond our wildest imaginings, and his whole life was devoted to spreading teaching or giving teaching to all those who would listen and showing them how to attain spirituality in their lives, because he knew from his experience that this world in which we live is merely one classroom of many that we will eventually visit. And he was able to tell us of the different classrooms that he had visited too, and that despite all appearances, there is a tremendous spiritual millennium or time when mankind on this earth will eventually experience peace and great enlightenment. And he believed this. He also believed in the cosmic intelligences who visited us for thousands of years in vehicles that we call flying saucers. He told us, and we believe, that he did actually meet these intelligences. He was in contact with them. And of course, this is one of the main reasons why the Aetherius Society was formed. But there are many, many aspects, too numerous to go into at this particular time. He was a great humanitarian, wonderful sense of humor, and all the years that I've known him, he never said a harsh word really about anybody. He just believed in the spiritual nature of man, and that's what he was encouraging us to be.
As you stated, he did state that he made a series of UFO contacts. In fact,
Yes.
the book, perhaps we can pick this up, Contacts with a God from
Space.
From Space. Can you tell us about some of the contacts, UFO contacts that he made?
Yes. When you study the life of George King, and this book is available, of course, all around the world, and it is a bestseller, it explains the contacts that were very popular in the 50s, and George King was one of many contactees who received a genuine contact. I'm not talking about the claims, the crazy claims, but the genuine contact. But he was the only one who was instructed to form a formal organization like the Aetherius Society as we know it today. He became extremely interested in spiritual subjects as a boy. And it was only when he came across the science of yoga did he realize that this was the way in which he could find answers to life, answers that he couldn't find in any other form of orthodox religion. So he turned to the science of yoga, and for 10 years he practiced yoga diligently for 8, 10, maybe sometimes 12 hours a day. And this discipline obviously enhanced his consciousness, and in 1954 he received what is now known as the famous command. This took place in May in 1954 when he was living in the West End of London, and it was on a Saturday morning. He was just doing his normal chores, being a bachelor, and then suddenly he heard this voice. And this voice was not in his head, it was outside, it filled the room. In fact, the noise of the traffic stilled, and this voice said to him a single sentence: "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament." And if George King was sitting here now with us, Sam, he will be honest with you and say that he had absolutely no idea what that sentence meant. But being an advanced yogi adept, he recognized the way in which this message had been given. So he thought about it and meditated upon it for about a week, and then he sat down and decided to go into a deep state of meditation in order to find out what this message really meant. And it was when he was in that state, or preparing to go into that stage of meditation, that he had a visitation, a mystic visitation, a phenomenon, if you like, not unique to him by any means. It's happened before, where a yoga master visited him from India in a projected form and actually materialized through his apartment and sat down in a chair opposite him and was to all intents and purposes physical, but he had just appeared. And this yoga master, George King, recognized. And the yoga master told him that he, George King, was one of the people who was chosen to be in contact with higher intelligence, and that he was to prepare himself in such a way that he could receive this information, which he did. And later he went into trance in the Caxton Hall in London before a public audience, a very, very deep state of yogic trance known as samadhi. And the first contact with an extraterrestrial, whom we call Aetherius, was made. It was tape recorded, and since that time there have been over 600 similar types of communication which have been professionally recorded, and this forms the basis of our teaching.
You know, that is truly amazing.
Yes, it is amazing.
Well, let's go back to the UFO contacts.
Right.
When he made those contacts, were those contacts made in a trance, or were they made physically? George
King has had three, I would say 4 types of contacts with UFO intelligences. The majority of the contacts that he has is when he goes into a state of trance, and this is...
Is he in a trance here?
Just about to go into a trance. This is what we call the transmission room. This is a specially soundproof room where George King used to go into this room, and you see the 2 microphones, or the 3 microphones. Yeah. He went into trance, and the space intelligences made contact telepathically with him. And the communication that came through him was recorded on professional tape recorders, and we do have those in our archives. And as I say, he's gone into this trance over 600 times. That's the first type of contact. The second type of contact, where he has actually physically met people from other worlds face to face in a physical body.
Let's pursue that a little bit further.
Those have been rare.
Where was he? And where did he meet these contacts?
Some of the contacts he had were in England. This is before he came to United States of America. And he has had physical contact with other beings from other worlds whilst he has been here in America.
Well, I'm sure that my audience would like to know more about this.
Sure.
What were the circumstances under which he made these contacts? Were they in the countryside? Were they made in the city? Where were they? Where did they take place?
One of them, probably the most famous, was in the countryside in a place in England, in Devonshire, called Holdstone Down, which is a small hill in southwest England. It's about 1,100 feet overlooking the Bristol Channel. And George King was instructed to go there and rendezvous at midnight with an intelligence from another world. And
this he was instructed by the being from the other world to go to the site.
By the Master Aetherius.
Yes, okay.
In a transmission, in one of these messages, he was instructed to go to a certain place at a certain time, and he did. And he went there alone at night, at midnight, on Holdstone Down, and he saw a craft coming across the skies. The craft stopped, and a beam came down, and a very, very advanced intelligence materialized. He saw him physically, and the reason for this contact was that we believe Holdstone Down to be a very powerful holy mountain. It's charged with spiritual energies, and during that time, the being, who we believe came from Venus, manipulated spiritual energy through George King's body to the Lebanon to avert a war there, or to stop a war that was actually going on in Lebanon at that time. And at the same time, some of the energy went into the Holy Mountain itself, and thus began a mission that George King was given, which was to take him 3 years, where he physically visited 18 mountains around the world, where he acted as a channel, a yogic channel, for energy to be placed into these mountains. And we believe that there are 18 mountains around the world that he visited that are now holy, plus another one, which is Kilimanjaro, which he didn't have to climb.
You mentioned the being as having come from Venus.
Yes.
Now, according to our scientists, Venus is not habitable. But at the same time, have there been cases where the observations of Sir George King have been verified by our scientists?
As far as the contacts where he has physically met people from other worlds, no. And there's a very good reason for that. As far as some of the other UFO sightings, if you like, that have occurred whilst George King has been on one of these mountains, oh yes, there have been lots of sightings. I mean, there have been lots of people. I can think of one occasion in 1973 where we were on Holdstone Down with George King, and I think probably there were about 6 people there who had PhDs, who had been through university, who had PhDs in biochemistry, etc. Were very, very down-to-earth scientists. And in the presence of George King, a lot of flying saucer activity was witnessed by, I would say about 15 or 16 people. So we're not talking about something which is just pie in the sky, where there was a tremendous amount of witnesses to the events that I talk about. But the actual meeting between George King and other people on a physical level has been between him and the other intelligences, and there are reasons for that.
Ray, the United States is not a utopia. It's certainly not a Garden of Eden.
No.
Why would anybody from outer space want to come here?
Well, that's a very good question, and of course a lot of people have asked that. I represented George King and the Aetherius Society in 1978 at the United Nations. And the United Nations General Assembly was going to hear a resolution that was being put forward by representatives of this movement throughout the whole world. And the resolution was urging the United Nations to become the kind of database, if you like, or the agency that collects all the information regarding the UFO contacts and the messages and the information in order to disseminate it to the world through their educational programs. And that delegation there in New York had people from all over the world. And the feeling was absolutely unanimous that the evidence was that despite the savage and horrific conditions on this earth, these intelligences are far, far more advanced than us, both technologically as well as spiritually, and their purpose in coming to this earth is to help mankind. Now, in the book, Contacts with the Gods from Space, both George King and Richard Lawrence, who is in charge of the London facility of the Society, have pointed out that this is not something new. There is evidence on this earth, throughout almost every culture, of advanced beings who have come down to assist in different ways around the world in different times in our history. So this is a continuation of something which has already happened. So in other words, there's obviously some kind of plan where advanced intelligences are looking at this earth knowing that sooner or later we are going to do something right. In other words, we are going to realize that we are spiritual beings using physical bodies, gaining experience, rather than physical beings trying to be spiritual. So in other words, there is a reason for us to be on the earth at this particular time and going through this particular phase of experience. And they are helping us in the ways that they are allowed to. Now, a lot of people say, well, if they really are interested in mankind, then why don't they just land, stop all wars, clear up all the mess, heal all the disease, take over all the educational organizations, and make everybody listen to them so that from now on there's no problems. Well, of course, they can't do that because that will be breaking the divine law. The divine law states that we are on this earth for a purpose, and that is to gain experience through the application of our own free will.
Well, then we could truthfully say then that there are beings in outer space who know and recognize that we are in desperate need of help.
Yes.
What about the possibility of coming and transforming or transferring us to another location in outer space?
Well, why should they do that? Why should we take our problems to another planet?
No, it wasn't. You think that, well, maybe be transformed here, we're just not ready to go and live with them?
It isn't a question of us not being ready, it's that we don't have the will. We're not willing.
Was Sir George King willing to be transported to outer space?
Well, he has had certain experiences where he has left this earth and has in fact visited other worlds, but not in a physical body. Being an advanced master of yoga, he is capable of raising his consciousness to such an extent where he can project it from the physical body. What we've got to understand here, Sam, and this is where your viewers and this is where the scientists of the world have yet to go through the door, marked consciousness. You can have spirit and matter in the same space. And the physical body that we take as being the be-all and end-all of our experience is only a tiny fraction of our true being. We are spiritual beings in a physical body. And all philosophy and all religious thought that has ever been given to the world, if you actually analyze it, it all points us in the same direction to realize our God potential. And there are various ways of doing it. And the problem with this earth is that we are taking such a long time to come to the realization of what we really are. And we can transcend all the problems that we have, but we're going about it in the wrong way.
Well, this was my next question. If these beings who come down and they wish to share and they wish to transform our society into a better society, well then, why couldn't we reach a point where there could be an exchange where we could go and visit them out in space?
That's an excellent question, and in the teachings that have been given through George King whilst he's in trance, some of the cosmic intelligences have stated this, that if we only move forward away from the materialistic politics and war and hate and things like that, and put our faith in the true nature of our divinity, and if we make that move, I'm talking about en masse now, not just one country or one individual, but the world as a whole decides to do this, then they have stated quite definitely that they would land openly and they would take us to different worlds and show us different cultures, if you like, that exist. But until that time comes, they are not allowed to do that until we have made the effort. Now, you've got to be absolutely honest. You know, World War I was described or justified as being the war to end all wars. And yet we were foolish enough and stupid enough to go into World War II, into the Korean War, into the Vietnam War. How many wars does it take, Sam, to realize that the answer to man's problems is not to kill ourselves, but to understand ourselves? And to understand how we think and what the different cultures around the world, how they can all interrelate and interface. The fact that a great being like Sri Krishna came to the earth and gave the Hindu teaching, and the fact that the Lord Buddha was born and gave the Buddhist teaching, and the fact that Jesus was born and gave Christianity, it doesn't mean to say that this is a segregation. It means that this is a continuation of divine truth, but just given at different times to different sets of people.
Well, now, you raised a question a few minutes ago. Why should they permit us to go and see them? I see this as a touch of arrogance on their part. As soon as we measure up, then they will accept us. One of the best ways of learning is by observation. Why couldn't they come down and invite some of us to go and see how they live and see the example that they are claiming to, you know,
well,
to perform and live in?
Certain people have, Sam. Certain people have, and I mean, even in the Bible, there are many cases where individuals have had tremendous spiritual revelation. And today, George King is not the only person who has had revelation through this type of experience. But you see, there is a limitation, and this is difficult to explain, but there is such a thing as the law of karma. Now, you may have heard of the law of karma. It's K-A-R-M-A. And virtually the law of karma is the law of action and reaction being opposite and equal. And they can only extend their actions in whatever way possible to mankind to the exact degree that they are accepted. That is the karmic law. Now, what I'm saying is that one of the reasons why the Aetherius Society was formed in 1955 was to make known this information to as many people as possible worldwide, so that something like this could happen. In fact, it is one of the aims and objects of the Aetherius Society to create conditions, favorable conditions for ultimately meetings with people from other planets. But you know, George King has not received, and the Aetherius Society has not received very much cooperation from official sources.
You know, I was about to ask you and to comment on the death threats that this man has received. And apparently, the man is innocuous from his readings, but yet and his observations, but yet he's not a threat, I suppose. Why has he had death threats?
Well, in the early days, and here is where we stand alone, I should say, as an organization when it comes to the UFO movement. In the early days, in the 1956, 57, it was made known that he would act as a channel, communication channel for certain intelligences. And one intelligence was the being we knew as the Master Jesus. Now, there are people on this earth who have an orthodox concept, who regard Jesus in a very special way. But being a mystic, being a master of yoga, and he's not the only one, there are certain teachings which indicate that the man Jesus who was born on this earth was not only a great master, but he was interplanetary.
Ray, I'm sorry to interrupt so rudely, but our time has virtually expired. I would like to ask you one more question. Have you had UFO contacts? I think that would be a great idea. I'd like to have that experience. Have you had one?
Yes.
You have?
Oh, many.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I have many.
Okay.
The one that I referred to was in 1961, which again was on Holston Down, and it was about midnight. There was about 50 people there, and it was about 400 feet up.
Yeah. Ray, we want to have to stop again. Thank you for appearing on Periscope, and I want to wish you continued success with the Aetherius Society.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sam.
My guest on Periscope tonight has been Ray Nielsen. He is the International Public Relations Representative, and he's a member of the Aetherius Society. This is Sam Coleman thanking you for viewing us and wishing all of you a very pleasant good evening.